Friends, the global carbon market, as it is evolving, needs to be understood both from the conceptual as well as practical aspects. All of us agree that there is a need to stabilize atmospheric CO2, and policymakers they propose that in order to stabilize this atmospheric CO2, uh, there, we need to act on two things. One is obviously to fund cleaner energy, renewable energy, and make sure that the technologies, the clean energy technologies, through research and development, become more affordable. So, this we call it as the research push. The second thing is about the carbon markets, and that is the agenda of discussion. The idea is the challenge of stabilizing atmospheric CO2 could be partially overcome by what is known as the market forces or market pool. And the assumption is that because of this market pool, there would be enough demand for the clean, green technologies. So, one of the ideas which we are going to discuss in this course is the idea of carbon market. So, carbon market is being proposed as the most innovative and the most cost effective tool for creating the necessary pool of for the cleaner technologies while putting a price on the polluting technologies. So this is the context of carbon market. So how do the carbon markets work? So the carbon markets, one point is we need to set a quota about the emissions. So beyond that, the emissions are not allowed. If a company, a nation, a group overcomes that quota, emits more than the set quota, then there is a provision of penalizing. Similarly, the carbon markets are designed in a way that if a company, an industry, an entity uh, saves on the CO2 emissions or the equivalent CO2 emissions, there is an incentive. So the carbon markets has an inbuilt agency for penalizing the excess and for rewarding the savings. Uh, the assumption is that the emissions or the pollution is a property. So this is the idea behind a core idea or core principle behind the carbon market. So what is done in this is fundamentally speaking is each unit of pollution is equivalent to each unit of property, and the second aspect is this property or these emissions become tradable. So this is a key insight about the carbon market, that we value the emissions as a property and this property becomes tradable. So companies where the reductions are costlier, they can trade with those who are having who can reduce the emissions at a cheaper rate. So the companies who have huge cost in reducing the emissions, they can buy the surplus reductions from the companies where the emission cuts are cheaper. So this is how the market is supposed to operate. The idea is, and this is the idea about the market economy, that the bigger is the emission market. For example, if you consider Europe as a total emission market, then the cost of transaction gets reduced and there is an overall gain in the efficiency. So in the European emission market, a real financial cost would force the polluters to weigh in the new options, that is, to adopt cleaner, greener technologies. So, if you look at the cost, minimum and maximum per ton of CO2 in the European market, so it was about, this is a slightly dated data, but nevertheless, it gives us an idea. So, about 7 euros was the minimum cost, and the maximum cost went to about 32 euros per ton of CO2 in the European Union market. So, this way, you understand that there is a cost put to this commodity, which is the CO2 emissions, right? And these are the typical values. So, now, under this framework of carbon market, what are the options or what are the choices which the polluters have? So, the first choice is for the polluter is to accept the cost. The second choice is to reduce the cost by changing the fuel mix, that is, by adopting cleaner sources. And the third set of choice, because of market pressure, is to conserve the fossil fuel, right? That is to reduce the overall consumption. So, this way, the market now offers the choices, and it's assumed that the market will function in a way that the polluter would be, because of market pull, forced to change its fuel mix, conserve energy, and make sure that he remains competitive. The advantage of the carbon market as being proposed is it has a flexibility across time and across geography. So one can reduce now, that is in the present. One can buy the credits upfront, or one can also buy the future options. So this way, one is possible to trade across the time. It's possible to trade across the time in the carbon market. So that gives us the flexibility across time. That is what it means that carbon market offers flexibility across time. One can reduce now in the present. One can buy credits upfront, that is planned for the future reductions, or one can buy future options, that is they can hedge for long-term higher emissions, right? So this is the fundamental aspect. Similarly, across geography means the emissions could be reduced in, say, a African country, and those could be bought by, let us say, an industrialized country in the European Union. Uh, there are third party players involved, obviously, because it's a market. There would be speculators who would speculate and take on the market risk in exchange, just as what we have in the stock market. And there would be the environmental groups which would buy and retire allowances, which might drive up the cost and which might force efficiency. So this could be the third party players, speculators and environmental groups who can remain active in the market, carbon market. The environmental groups remaining active in the market as a part of their activism, because for them, what is important is to improve the efficiency, forcing the efficiency. And there could be some economic actors like speculators whose aim is to earn money, but then they would also, in a way, act as a third party in this whole carbon market by taking on the market risk in exchange for potential payback. Obviously, there are critics about the carbon market, and one of the most important critic is about greenwashing. So, according to one expert, the carbon offsets are based on the fictitious carbon accounting, and they cannot make a company carbon neutral in the real sense. So we will talk about this in the course of time about this critique as to what is greenwashing and how it could be avoided by proper checks and balances in the carbon market. So carbon markets, as they are evolving, they have criticisms about fictitious accounting, because there could be fudging of the data and true carbon neutrality cannot be achieved. This might also lead to a slower innovation, because then the root causes of climate change are not addressed and only market solutions are promoted. And there is a risk of greenwashing where, without the companies actually changing the behavior, they just make sure that they appear to reduce their emissions. So these are the criticisms of uh, carbon market. But despite this, it is important for us to understand that the environmental market or carbon market are now a global reality. And because they are now a global reality, we need to understand the concepts, understand what are the terms which are used in the carbon market, and accordingly intervene.